Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at some of our headlines. Syria's interior minister says that violent clashes in the Druze majority city of Sweida have halted after reports of further action. Israel and Syria have agreed to a US brokered ceasefire after Israeli military action over the sectarian violence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Kyiv has offered a new round of direct talks with Moscow for next week as the Russia-Ukraine war continues to rage on. Intensifying aerial attacks from both sides come amid continued calls for a truce. The reported death toll from Israeli attacks on Gaza raid sites yesterday has now risen to 39. That's according to the Gaza Civil Defense Agency. Questions continue to be raised by humanitarian groups over the safety of GHF aid sites in Gaza, following potentially hundreds of casualties. At least 14 people have died, with others missing after heavy rainfall that led to flash flooding and landslides in South Korea. Search and rescue operations are ongoing, with fears that the death toll could still rise. The death toll in Vietnam after a tourist boat capsized has now risen to 37 people, with 5 still missing. The Wonder Sea boat was carrying 48 passengers and 5 crew on a tour of the popular Ha Long Bay when the incident occurred. Japanese citizens are heading to the polls, with voting in the tightly contested upper house election. In a key test for Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, the potential for a loss of LDP-led coalition majority could lead to political instability. A man has been charged with assault with a deadly weapon following an incident in LA, where a car drove into a crowd of people outside of a nightclub. Dozens have been injured, with many in a critical or serious condition. That's according to local emergency services. And Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk has further cemented his legacy as a heavyweight all-time boxing great after unifying the division for a second time. This follows a devastating win over Daniel Dubois in London, with the British fighter overwhelmed and stopped in the 5th round. We start this hour as at least 2 people remain missing and 2 have been confirmed dead in the northern South Korean county of Gapyeong amid heavy rain, flooding and landslides, that according to authorities from the local fire department. This comes as authorities reported that torrential rains that began on July the 18th in Sancheong County left at least 8 dead and 6 missing. This brings the nationwide death toll so far to 14, with 12 still unaccounted for since the rains began on July the 16th. As per reports, South Korea typically experiences monsoon rains in July and is usually well prepared. But this week, the country's southern regions were hit by especially intense downpours, with some of the heaviest hourly rainfall on record, according to official weather data. The South Korean government weather forecaster has said that the rainfall is likely to stop on July the 20th and be followed by a potential heat wave. Well, joining us to discuss this situation is Desmond Majekadomnu, who is an environmentalist joining us from Lagos. Desmond, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us. Another example of heavy rainfall having catastrophic repercussions, specifically relating to deaths, which could rise, a toll that sees also several people missing. Is this a standard situation? We've just said that the rain is heavier than usual. Do you think that there is a specific reason for these heavier rains that have triggered landslides, flash flooding and countless deaths?
Absolutely. Anthropogenic. That's the word that describes the whole reason. Anthropogenic, human caused. Yes. Again, you said something in your earlier bulletin that this was the heaviest hourly rainfall record ever recorded, ever experienced. The scientists told us this would happen. But you don't actually need a scientist to let you know that if you're going to have a lot more heat and you have water, then the water evaporates. This is what you learn in, in your mother's kitchen. And we are heating up the planet. There's no controversy about that. We have weather measurements, temperature measurements coming in on a regular basis from every corner of the world. This is a classic symptom of climate change that is caused by us humans. And then also possibly too much vegetation deforestation, allowing highland areas to be more susceptible to erosion. But, and this is where we got to get it right, it's going to get worse if we don't change our ways, if we don't change our attitude towards nature. So definitely we're on a trajectory that's not looking very good, but it's like nature telling humanity, change your ways, stop this nonsense. As the Secretary General of the United Nations said some time back, that this is just, mankind is waging war against nature, and this is suicidal. So we got to get off that path.
Yes, and Desmond, can you describe in some more detail how heavy rainfall like this over a period of days leads to flash flooding, but also landslide? What's the catalyst for that shift from just rainfall, as we've all experienced, to those deadly disasters with deadly consequences?
Yes, very good point. The reality is that, we've always had a bit of heavy rain from time to time. Sometimes over a period of 50 years, they'll get a once in a 50-year occurrence. But nature generally has her way of absorbing a lot of the rainfall, a lot of even heavy rainfall. And she absorbs it. You have the vegetation, the trees do a wonderful job of absorbing extra precipitation from their root zone, and then they bring it back up, they store it for a while, then they release it through transvaporation processes and so on. But the reality is that we have been cutting far too many of these trees, and also the streams and rivers, which also carry the water. We have not really been taking enough good care of them. And a lot of them have got silted up because of erosion that happens, because the trees are so wonderful. They really are. Their roots protect the soil from erosion. So you're getting a lot of this buildup of silt in the riverbeds and the streams. So their capacity to even carry the flood water is reduced. So you have more flood water because of the global warming, and then you're reducing the natural capacity of nature to absorb or to run this water to the streams, to the rivers, and eventually into the lagoons and into the oceans. So it's all, again, down to we doing the wrong thing. And we're disobeying fundamental laws of nature, of life. These are laws of physics and metaphysics. It's not just physical laws that action will beget a reaction, but it's also spiritual laws that, you get what you sow. It's the law of karma. It's the law of retributive justice. And we need to wake up to this reality and stop our negative behavior that is bringing about this reaction. So definitely, it's something that we are causing, and we're going to make it a lot worse. And this is where we are really, really worried, because it could get to a stage where it could be very, very catastrophic. I mean, hurricanes and typhoons with this kind of severity and worse severity hitting on a far more regular basis. Yeah, we don't need that.
Yes, Desmond, absolutely. If you stay with us, you mention typhoons, and we head over now to Hong Kong, which has issued its highest tropical cyclone warning as Typhoon Whipper approaches the city, prompting authorities to cancel classes and ground hundreds of flights. The Hong Kong Observatory has hosted the T10 warning signal, indicating winds exceeding 118 kilometres per hour, posing a considerable threat to the region. The southern part of Hong Kong is currently experiencing destructive winds. Approximately 500 flights have been cancelled, with around 400 scheduled to operate later today. Over 200 people have taken refuge in government shelters, and authorities have reported fallen trees and at least one person requiring hospital treatment. In response, all-day schools and daycare centres have suspended their classes, while train services are operating on a limited basis. Meanwhile, China's Hainan and Guangdong provinces are also on high alert. The typhoon has already caused heavy rain and flooding in the Philippines, with 2 people reported missing. Well, Desmond, thank you for staying with us. Can you provide some context on some of the information we've given there? Of course, some jargon, some technical language, but how significant is this typhoon that is hitting Hong Kong? And how ready is Hong Kong to deal with this situation? Is it a common occurrence, or is this, as we've said, with the upper level and the T10 rating, is this almost as bad as it can get?
Is it a common occurrence? Well, actually, it is not, or it was not a common occurrence. These sort of occurrences would have happened because of various weather conditions that just came together at a particular time, and you could have a very, very heavy typhoon. But they're called once in 100 years occurrences. But what is happening now is that it's once in a decade, and it's coming to twice in a decade. And very soon, if we don't change our attitudes, and it's going to require fundamental changes. Very soon, it'll be a yearly occurrence happening, in multiple locations, because we are heating up the planet beyond its normal capacity. Remember how special this planet Earth is. We have information from spectrography of many, many millions of planets. And so far, this is the only one that has the type of atmosphere that we have that can support life as we know it. And the reason why it has this capacity to support life is because of the delicate balance of the various gases that are in our atmosphere. But we've been pumping millions and hundreds of millions of tons of heat-trapping gases into our atmosphere. So we're warming up the planet beyond its normal capacity. And this is very, very serious indeed. There has to be immediate action. We, as humanity, we need to evolve. We need to now evolve beyond where we've been for thousands of years, driven by selfishness and the desire for sense gratification and greed and pride. And we are exerting far too much negativity, not just against ourselves now, but against nature. And the reality is that nature has to give back what you give her. Absolutely.
Yes,
so
and
that's
Desmond,
the reality.
Yes, sorry to interject there. We had some interference. Just before we move on, you talk about the work that humans are doing to negatively impact the environment, and of course, more extreme weather becoming the norm, it seems. What steps do need to be taken by individuals, but also potentially by heads of states and groups of countries to try and tackle this issue?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we as individuals, we have to come together. We have to come together and know that we're all inhabitants. We're all one big, big family on this wonderful, wonderful world of ours. And we have to have what they call a renewal of our minds, a change of our attitudes, a far more caring, loving, compassionate disposition towards each other. And we need to put people first, ahead of our profit, ahead of our selfish interest. And that's the wonderful silver lining on this very, very dark cloud. And the cloud is so dark because it is going to get worse to the extent that you could have these catastrophes happening all over the place on a regular basis. But it doesn't have to get that way. And I'm very, very confident that we shall change our attitudes because, hey, guess what? For the children's sake, and who doesn't love children? Come on, for their sake, for the young people's sake, we have to change. And we have a window of opportunity to make that change. We haven't gone past what they call the tipping points where you won't even be able to reverse the situation. We haven't reached there yet, but we're heading headlong towards it, and our foot is still on the accelerator. So it's a wake-up call for humanity, and we should know that we're all just brothers and sisters in one big family, and we need to express far more care and compassion towards each other and nurture nature. Love Mother Nature. Hey, guess what? Is she going to love us back?
Yes, Desmond Majekodunmi, thank you ever so much for taking the time to provide that insight there. We will, of course, bring you all the developments from the flash flooding, landslides in South Korea, and also that typhoon hitting Hong Kong. But we move on now, and Sudan's Prime Minister Kamal Idris has pledged to rebuild Khartoum, which has been devastated by more than 2 years of war. This marks his first visit to the capital since assuming office in May. During his tour of the destroyed infrastructure, Idris outlined plans for large-scale repair projects to accommodate the return of at least some of the over 3.5 million people displaced by violence. Idris emphasised that Khartoum would once again stand as a proud national capital. However, the task of reconstruction is immense, with the government estimating the cost of rebuilding Khartoum alone at $350 billion. The war between Sudan's army and the Rapid Support Forces continues, and while the army has regained control of Khartoum, fighting persists across the country. The humanitarian crisis continues to worsen as well, with millions in urgent need of aid and basic services. Well, joining us to discuss this latest development in Sudan, that of course is still gripped by a civil war, Dr. Charles Sinkala, an international relations expert who is joining us from Johannesburg. Dr. Sinkala, thank you for joining us live and taking the time to speak with us. This move by Idris in Khartoum to talk about bringing it back to where it was, is this symbolic, or is it a real shift and a real momentum for the Sudanese government, which of course is still facing fighting on a war front?
Thank you very much. I think it is significant as it is the step forward to the conflict solution and the de-escalation of military support that has, affected the Sudanese government and the people for quite some time.
Yes, and Dr. Sinkala, of course, the position is a difficult one. We've mentioned there so many people displaced, millions potentially displaced, humanitarian crises on the ground as well. Not just looking at the Sudanese government, what do you think is needed from the wider African region, but also international players during a time of such uncertainty for so many?
Sympathy, empathy, and solidarity for the peoples of Sudan. Any support in terms of humanitarian support would be needed, and as well the condemnation of those who are escalating military support to those government. I think bilateral, multilateral diplomatic mediation is also needed so that they can find a win-win position in terms of the conflict.
Yes, and Dr. Sinkala, let's take it back now. Of course, years of civil war that have gripped Sudan. Could you provide some context on the modern state of play? What's happening right now on the ground? Is the Sudanese government making progress? And what is this conflict all about in Sudan?
Well, if I go back 30 years ago, even 40 years ago, as you may be aware, Sudan was one country. The separation of South and North Sudan has been exacerbated by the conflicts, on the fight for the minerals and the position of the country, and as well as the international interference within that region that sides the militias. Over the years, yes, it was agreed as the resolution was tabled out that the country should be split into countries. And that's why now we have the northern part of Sudan and we've got a country as well as called South Sudan. But the de-escalation of military support and the fight for, the position of wealth and minerals within that region continues with little hope that these conflicts will come to an end anytime soon, as each and every time a new wound pops up.
Yes, and Dr. Sinkala, to bring an end to our discussion, what comes next? Idris, of course, talking about rebuilding and growing and moving forward. How likely is that, and how close is an end to this conflict?
Well, the challenge in the world is the lip service. Many nations, many people, many organizations has only ended on lip service. I call it lip service because there's no implementation that is followed up apart from the pronouncements that they shall table up the mediation within the countries. I think we need to reach to an extent that physical intervention within the conflict-torn zone of Sudan, to de-escalate, to support in terms of military. I do not support, the support of military within the region, which is under conflict, as that just exacerbates the conflicts moving forward. We have to give either sanctions to the individuals that are supporting, including countries. The United Nations, according to the United Nations Security Council and the Charter, has always promoted the international relations between the nations, but part of the nations who are members of the 192 countries of the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council are part of the conflict that are fueling and supporting either side of the conflict of the war.
Yes, Dr. Charles Sinkala, thank you ever so much for taking the time and providing that context. We will continue to monitor the situation in Sudan and bring that to you here on NewsX World. Now time, though, to head to Europe, and in a significant diplomatic move. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that Kyiv has formally extended an offer to Moscow for a new round of peace talks to take place next week. Speaking during his nightly address, the Ukrainian president emphasised the urgent need for a ceasefire, calling for negotiations to take place once again in Istanbul. This would be the third round of talks between the two nations in the past few months. While earlier discussions led to prisoner exchanges, no significant progress has been made towards ending the war, which is now in its fourth year. The latest proposal comes from Rustem Umerov, Ukraine's newly appointed head of the National Security and Defence Council. Well, with us to discuss this latest development in a war that has, of course, gripped parts of Europe and has raised questions across the world, Professor Veselin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean of the Jindal Global Law School, who is joining us live from Bulgaria. Professor Popovsky, as always, thank you for taking the time. Do you think that Russia will agree to these ceasefire talks?
I hope so. We all hope so, because this is the time when we need to remind to Russia that it's already 6 months since January, when Donald Trump is in power, and he demanded ceasefire. Not less than Donald Trump asked Russia to agree on an unconditional 30-day ceasefire back then in January. Russia continues to bomb cities, to kill civilians almost daily. And this is definitely the time to ask Russia for its accountability, why it doesn't negotiate, why it doesn't meet the Ukrainian. Zelensky was very direct. He said, I can do everything. I can meet face to face with the Russian president. I have no worry to talk about anything Russians want to talk about, and reach that ceasefire. It comes also in a better timing, let's say, for Ukrainians, because we have Donald Trump ultimatum to Putin after meeting with the NATO Director General Rutte. Trump announced a 50 days ultimatum for Russia to agree on a ceasefire. But also, it comes after United States agree with NATO to sell a lot of munitions, including Patriots air defense systems, and this will be supplied to Ukraine. So this massive new military support for Ukraine, including the package which the European Union imposes on Russia, comes to the point because the previous two negotiations failed, apart from some prisoners exchange, which is very normal. They don't need negotiations to exchange prisoners of war. This could be done by the generals on the battlefield. But now it's time for a serious negotiations as to end the fire and to move to a longer-term peace deal.
Professor Popovsky, let's look at if these talks do go ahead. Of course, previously, Ukraine questioned Russia's delegation that was sent. Do you think a potential US delegation could be involved in some capacity? And how would that potential mediation influence talks, given the fact that Trump has given this 50-day ultimatum?
I hope so. Again, we have a change in the head of the delegation on Ukrainian side. You mentioned the former defense minister Umerov, who will lead the delegation, a general, but also Keith Kellogg, a general, now visited Kiev for 6 days. And he was very well informed about the Russian strikes, the civilian casualties. And coming back from Kiev, obviously, Keith Kellogg informed the US administration. So we have much more clarity now. And we hope that the United States administration also has this clarity after Keith Kellogg's visit to Kiev. We don't see Steve Witkoff anymore going to Moscow, by the way. That's useless US businessman who was going to Moscow in the beginning and deliver nothing, zero impact on the negotiations. So the seriousness of the United States administration to see some progress here is there. And obviously Ukrainians also have a stronger voice in Istanbul next week. Well, we need still to see what Russia will respond. Hopefully Russia will send a delegation, because Russia also wants to be seen as constructive, at least in talks. They don't want to seize the relationship with the US administration. They consider Donald Trump still to be kind of their friend in this. So the hopes are there will be negotiations in Istanbul. We don't know when exactly, but let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that this negotiation will go beyond just prisoners exchange.
Yes, and Professor Popovsky, we have around a minute or so left. If Russia says no to these talks, or if the talks take place and no further progress is made, what comes next? Trump's given his ultimatum. We wait to see whether that actually amounts to any sanctions. But if Russia does want to continue this war, as some experts believe, this could all be futile.
It's possible, and you're absolutely correct. Russia has not been very constructive in previous negotiations. So what comes next is more sanctions on Russia and more support for Ukraine. There is no other way out of this conflict unless many more countries support Ukraine, including with military ammunition, and more countries sanction Russia, stopping buying Russian oil and gas. And this is a very clear message for countries that continue, unfortunately, to buy Russian petroleum and gas, which basically gives Putin. Putin has no other revenue apart from selling oil and gas to the world. And if countries impose sanctions on Russia, and many did, but some big exporters still are there.
Yes, absolutely. Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you ever so much for joining us. We will, of course, here on NewsX World, bring you all the developments on these potential peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. But we move on now and head over to North America. A Delta Airlines Boeing 767 was forced to make an emergency landing at Los Angeles International Airport after its left engine caught fire shortly after takeoff. The flight en route to Atlanta quickly returned to Los Angeles Airport, where emergency crews promptly extinguished the blaze upon landing. None of the 230 passengers and crew on board were injured during the incident. The Federal Aviation Administration has now opened an investigation to determine the cause of the engine fire. This marks the second such engine fire involving a Delta aircraft this year, raising concerns about aircraft safety. Officials say the Boeing 767 involved is powered by General Electric CF6 engines, and the ongoing inquiry will focus on identifying and underlying issues to prevent future occurrences. Well, that is all we have time for, but we'll be back soon with more of your latest international news updates.